$837,000. That is the number nobody puts on the retirement milestone chart. The exact portfolio size where 7% annual real returns start generating more than the median American household income every single year without you depositing a single additional dollar. Not the famous $1 million benchmark, not the vague retire comfortably aspiration. The actual calculable inflection point where your capital's annual output crosses the average earned income of a working American. And the fact that you have never seen this specific number on a financial calculator or a retirement planning website is not an oversight. Here is what most people watching this already feel in their gut without being able to name it. You have been doing the right things. You have contributed consistently, sometimes through years when it felt pointless and the balance barely moved. You left the account alone when the market dropped and every headline was screaming to get out. You resisted the crypto trade, the hot stock tip at the dinner party, the newsletter promising 22% annually. You did the boring, correct thing repeatedly for years. And when you log into the account today, the number is there. It is real. But the feeling of freedom is not. And that gap between what the math says you have accumulated and what you actually feel like you are capable of is one of the most common and least discussed forms of financial frustration in America right now. Fidelity's 2025 Retirement Savings Assessment found that 61% of Americans who described themselves as on track for retirement also reported feeling their savings were inadequate. 61%. On track and still anxious. That is not a personal failure. That is a measurement problem. You have been measuring the wrong thing. And today we are going to fix that. Before I show you the 5 signs, I need you to hold one image in your head because I am going to return to it throughout this entire video. Picture a pressure gauge on a water main running underneath a city building. The city has been pumping water through that pipe for 20 years. The pressure has been building slowly, almost invisibly, the entire time. For the first 15 years, you could open a faucet anywhere in the building and get barely a trickle. Same pipe, same pump, same water supply. But at a certain point, the pressure inside the system crosses a threshold. Now, when you open the faucet, the water comes out with real, immediate force. Nothing about the pipe changed. Nothing about the pump changed. What changed was the accumulated pressure inside the system itself. Your investment portfolio works exactly this way. Every contribution you ever made, every reinvested dividend, every year you sat still when the market dropped 30% and you did not sell, every single one of those decisions was pressure accumulating in the pipe. Most people spend years staring at the faucet wondering why nothing dramatic is coming out. They diagnose the pump. They consider switching water companies. They start looking at real estate, crypto, covered calls, anything that might explain why the faucet feels weak. What they do not realize is that the pressure is already there. They crossed the threshold. They just have not learned to read the gauge yet. Now let me put actual numbers on this before anything else, because a framework without arithmetic is useless. Every projection in this video uses 7% annual return after inflation, compounding monthly. That is the approximate real historical return of a diversified stock index going back a century, confirmed by Robert Shiller's data set at Yale. It is not an optimistic assumption. It is conservative by design, and every single number I give you is built on that floor. Here is what a portfolio at 7% actually produces in dollar terms at different balance levels. $200,000 generates $14,000 per year, $1,167 a month. A car payment and utilities, real but not life-changing. $400,000 generates $28,000 per year, $2,333 a month. That covers health insurance, electricity, groceries, and your phone bill every single month without a single hour of your labor. $600,000 generates $42,000 per year, $3,500 a month. That is more than the median American household spends on housing costs annually, coming entirely from capital in your absence. $800,000 generates $56,000 per year, $4,667 a month. That is above the median individual income in the United States without 1 minute of work. $1 million generates $70,000 per year, $5,833 a month. a fully funded middle-class life in most American cities, produced entirely by the second engine running in the background. The return rate is constant in that entire table. The time horizon is constant. The only variable is the size of the pile. And the reason most people have never felt a meaningful threshold cross is that nobody ever showed them that table. They were handed a single target, usually 1 million, sometimes 1.5, and told that everything below it was insufficient. But look at what happens between 400,000 and 600,000. You go from the portfolio barely covering your fixed costs to it covering your entire annual housing expense from passive output alone. That is not an arbitrary jump in a chart. That is a structural shift in what your money is capable of doing, whether you show up to work or not. The freedom number is not a cliff you fall off when you hit a specific balance. It is a range with multiple real inflection points, and you may have already crossed at least one of them without having a name for what just happened. This matters for a reason that is more behavioral than mathematical. Dalbar, the financial research firm that has tracked actual investor behavior every year since 1994, consistently finds that the average equity investor significantly underperforms the very funds they own. Over the 20-year period ending in 2023, the S&P 500 returned approximately 10.2% annually. The average equity fund investor captured 6.8%. That 3.4 percentage point gap is not fees. It is not market timing in the sophisticated sense. It is people selling at low points and buying at high points, doing the exact opposite of what the math requires, because they could not see the pressure in the pipe. They felt nothing happening. They diagnosed a broken system, and they intervened at precisely the worst possible moment, releasing all the accumulated pressure right before it was about to do its most powerful work. Showing you the 5 signs that you have already crossed a meaningful threshold is not motivational content. It is a behavioral firewall. If you can see that the pressure is already there, you are dramatically less likely to release it at the moment it matters most. In a few minutes, I am going to introduce you to someone I am calling Daniel. He is 49 years old. He earns $86,000 a year managing logistics for a regional trucking company outside Columbus, Ohio. He has contributed to his 401k consistently since his late 20s. He has never panic sold. He has sat through 2 major corrections without touching the account, and right now he is sitting at $412,000, staring at a projection showing $900,000 by 65, feeling like that number is not enough and increasingly tempted to try something different. Daniel is not behind. Daniel has already crossed 2 of the 5 signs I am about to describe. The problem is, he has never seen the gauge. We will come back to Daniel at the end. But first, sign number 1. And this is the one that financial media almost never talks about in plain language. Sign number 1 is the silent income flip. This is the specific moment when your portfolio's annual return in raw dollar terms exceeds your annual contribution in raw dollar terms. Not as a percentage, not relative to anything. Just dollars the account generated this year versus dollars you manually deposited this year. Most investors know their contribution number. It is on the screen every time they log in. Almost none of them track their return number in the same mental frame as an income figure in its own right. Here is why the flip matters. When you are contributing $6,000 a year and your portfolio generates $4,000 in returns, you are still the primary engine. Your labor is doing more work than your capital. That is phase 1. It is not a failure. It is how the system works at the beginning. But the moment the return number crosses your contribution number, something structural has changed that has nothing to do with your effort. The capital is now doing at least as much work as you are, and it works every hour of every day, including the ones where you are sick, exhausted, on vacation, or asleep. At a $180,000 portfolio earning 7%, annual returns are approximately $12,600. If you are contributing $6,000 annually, the flip happened over a year ago, and you never noticed. At $250,000, returns are $17,500 per year. The average American contributes roughly $10,000 to $12,000 annually across all retirement accounts according to Vanguard's 2024 How America Saves report, which means a significant share of people who consider themselves early-stage investors have already crossed this threshold without a word from anyone. The silent income flip is sign number 1 that you have already passed a real freedom marker. It just never appeared on the account statement as a headline. Sign number 2 is what I call the replacement rate crack. And this one requires a small mental shift before the number lands properly. Most retirement planning is built around one question: how much money will you need in retirement? The standard answer from the financial planning industry is 80% of your pre-retirement income. That figure appears everywhere, on brokerage websites, in HR enrollment packets, in every basic calculator you have ever used. The problem is that number was designed for people with a pension, no mortgage, and adult children who are financially independent. It is a mid-century assumption dressed up as modern guidance. Here is what the actual data shows for millennial and late Gen X households in 2025. According to the Employee Benefit Research Institute's 2025 Retirement Confidence Survey, the median expected replacement rate among pre-retirees is, in fact, closer to 70%. But the same survey found that among retirees who had already transitioned out of the workforce, actual spending in the first 5 years of retirement averaged only 55 to 60% of pre-retirement income, not because they were depriving themselves, but because the work-related expenses vanished. The commuting costs disappeared. The professional wardrobe budget went to zero. The twice-a-week lunch-out habit evaporated. Payroll taxes stopped. Disability insurance premiums stopped. The structural costs of having a job turned out to be a significant portion of what people thought they needed to maintain their lifestyle. What this means in practice is that the freedom number most people are using as their target is calculated against an income replacement figure that was already inflated by the cost of working. The actual gap between where you are and where the money starts doing the job is smaller than the calculator told you. The replacement rate crack is sign number 2. If your portfolio's annual output, using 7%, is already covering 40 to 50% of your current take-home pay, you are not halfway to the freedom number. You are inside the range where the math starts to work in a completely different way. Let me make this concrete with specific numbers before going further. Take someone earning $90,000 per year with a take-home of approximately $72,000 after federal and state taxes. The standard 80% replacement rule says they need $57,600 per year from their portfolio in retirement. At a 4% withdrawal rate, that requires a portfolio of $1,440,000. That is the number on their calculator. That is the number making them feel behind. But if their actual retirement spending, once work-related costs drop away, lands closer to 55% of gross income, the real target is $49,500 per year. At 4% withdrawal, that requires a portfolio of $1,237,500. That is $200,000 less than the calculator said, and $200,000 less at 7% real returns over 20 years represents roughly 17 years of contributions for a typical household. The target moved. Not because you got lucky. Because the measurement was wrong from the start. Sign number 3 is the correction survival record, and this is the one most investors carry without knowing its actual value. Think back over the last 10 years of your investing life. How many significant market corrections did you sit through without selling? 2018, when the S&P dropped nearly 20% in the fourth quarter alone. March 2020, when the market fell 34% in 33 days, the fastest bear market in recorded history. 2022, when rate hikes and inflation fears pulled equity markets down roughly 20% over the calendar year. Every one of those events felt, in the moment, like it might be different this time. The headlines were catastrophic. Serious economists were predicting prolonged damage. A large number of investors sold. Dalbar's 2023 data found that the average equity investor in 2022 alone captured less than half of the market's actual performance due to poor timing. If you sat through those corrections without selling, you did not just avoid a loss. You built something with no price tag in any financial calculator, a demonstrated behavioral track record. That record is the single most predictive variable in whether the math in your portfolio actually reaches completion. Not your asset allocation, not your expense ratio, though that matters too. Your documented ability to do nothing when every signal in your brain is telling you to act is worth more in compounding terms than any fund selection decision you will ever make. Every correction you survived without touching the account is evidence that you have the behavioral infrastructure to let the pressure keep building. That is sign number 3. Now here is the anti-diagnosis that most financial content will never say out loud, and this is the part of the video I have been building towards since the opening. You probably think, if you are feeling frustrated with your progress, that the problem is your return rate, or your fund selection, or that you got into the market too late, or that you need a smarter strategy, a different allocation, a more sophisticated approach. That is the diagnosis almost everyone makes when they feel the gap between their balance and their sense of financial security. It is the wrong diagnosis, and here is the proof. The problem is not the engine. The problem is that you cannot see the pressure gauge, so you keep second-guessing the engine. I want to be precise about this because it is the kind of argument that collapses without specific numbers. The difference between a portfolio that reaches completion and one that does not is almost never the return rate over the final decade. The S&P 500 has delivered positive returns in approximately 73% of all calendar years going back to 1928, according to data compiled by NYU Stern's Damodaran database. The market is not the variable that destroys most retirement plans. Behavior at the wrong moment is, and behavior is driven by perception. Specifically, the perception that progress has stalled, that the pressure is not building, which triggers the intervention that releases all the pressure you spent a decade accumulating. The 5 signs in this video exist specifically to correct that perception before it triggers a decision that cannot be undone. Sign number 4 is the cost of doing nothing shift, and this is where the math gets genuinely disorienting in a way that tends to change how people look at their account statements permanently. Early in the accumulation phase, the first decade of investing, the cost of missing a single month of contributions is modest. If you skip 1 month of a $500 contribution when your portfolio is at $20,000, the long-term cost at 7% over 25 years is roughly $2,700. Real money, but not life-altering. Now here is the same calculation when your portfolio has reached $400,000. You are no longer the primary engine. At $400,007%, the account generates $28,000 per year on its own, about $2,300 per month, without any contribution from you at all. Which means the cost of one bad decision, one panic sell, one unnecessary withdrawal, 1 year of redirecting contributions into something speculative is no longer measured in the contribution you missed. It is measured in the compounding you interrupted on a base that is now generating real, meaningful monthly output. The math did not become more forgiving as the balance grew. It became significantly less forgiving of behavioral mistakes, while simultaneously becoming significantly more powerful if you simply stay out of the way. The cost of doing nothing shift means that at this stage of the portfolio, the most expensive decisions are not the ones where you fail to act. They are the ones where you act unnecessarily. Sign number 4 is the recognition that you have entered the phase where discipline is no longer about adding to the system. It is about not dismantling what is already compounding. Now let me bring Daniel back. He is 49, $412,000. He earns $86,000 a year in Columbus, and he has been quietly convinced for about 2 years that he is behind, that the trajectory is too slow, that $900,000 at 65 is inadequate, that he needs to do something different. He has been reading about dividend investing, about sector rotation, about real estate syndications. Not because he is reckless, because the faucet still feels weak and he cannot see the pressure gauge. Here is what Daniel's actual numbers show when you run them against the 5 signs. Sign 1. Daniel contributes approximately $8,400 per year across his 401k and a small Roth IRA. His $412,000 portfolio at 7% generates $28,840 per year. His capital is generating 3.4 times what he manually deposits. The flip happened years ago and no statement ever flagged it. Sign 2. Daniel's actual work-related expenses, commuting, lunches, professional attire, disability insurance through his employer, account for roughly $9,000 to $11,000 annually. His real retirement spending target, adjusted for the removal of those costs, is meaningfully lower than the 80% replacement figure his brokerage calculator is using. Sign 3. Daniel sat through the 2020 COVID crash and the 2022 drawdown without selling, both times. He did not get credit for that on any statement, but the compounding did. Sign 4. Daniel has crossed into the phase where the cost of a bad decision outweighs the benefit of any strategic optimization he is considering. The alternatives he is researching would not accelerate his timeline. They would introduce fees, complexity, and behavioral volatility into a system that is already mathematically on its way to a real outcome. Daniel has already crossed 2 significant inflection points. The problem is not the portfolio. The problem is that Daniel has been staring at the faucet instead of the pressure gauge. We will close his story in the next block, with the 3 specific actions and the number that finally showed him what he had actually built. Sign number 5 is the one that tends to land the hardest when people finally see it, because it involves a number they have never been asked to calculate before. It is called the runway ratio, and it works like this. Take your current portfolio balance. Divide it by your current annual household spending. The result tells you how many years your portfolio could sustain your lifestyle at its current size, with 0 additional contributions and 0 investment returns, just the raw capital sitting there being spent down. If you are 45 years old and your portfolio holds $350,000 and your household spends $48,000 per year, your runway ratio is 7.3. 7 years. That is the floor, the absolute worst-case number with no returns, no contributions, no Social Security, no part-time income, nothing. Now add 7% annual returns back in. At $350,000 earning 7%, you are generating $24,500 per year, which covers roughly half your annual spending from returns alone, which means the actual runway, with returns factored in but still no new contributions, stretches dramatically further than the raw number suggested. A standard compound interest calculator will show you that $350,000 at 7%, being drawn down at $48,000 per year with no new contributions, lasts approximately 11 to 12 years before reaching 0. But here is what most people miss in that calculation. By the time you hit year 7 or 8 of that drawdown, you are also eligible for Social Security, which according to the Social Security Administration's 2025 average benefit data, pays a retired worker roughly $22,000 per year at full retirement age. Add that in, and the drawdown rate on your portfolio drops to $26,000 per year. At that rate, the same $350,000 portfolio does not run out. It stabilizes. The runway ratio is sign number 5 not because it proves you can retire today. It proves that the floor underneath you is significantly higher than you thought. The pressure in the pipe is not theoretical. It has weight. Now, I want to address the thing financial content almost never says out loud, because it is slightly uncomfortable and entirely true. You think the reason you do not feel the freedom number is that you have not reached it yet. The actual reason is that nobody ever defined what reaching it looks like in real daily behavioral terms. The financial industry has one definition of success: a number on a screen at a specific age. No intermediate markers. No gauge you can read in year 12 or year 19 of a 30-year journey. Just the destination number, presented as the only measurement that matters, with everything below it labeled insufficient. That framing is not neutral. It is structurally designed to produce anxiety in people who are actually on track, which keeps them engaged with financial content, financial products, and financial advisors, all of which generate revenue. The 5 signs in this video are intermediate markers. They are the gauge readings. They do not replace the destination, but they make the journey legible in a way that the industry has no incentive to make legible for you. Now, 3 specific actions. Not general principles. Not things that require a financial advisor, a budget overhaul, or a dramatic lifestyle change. 3 decisions you can make this week with the information you already have. Action 1. Calculate your silent income flip number today, not this weekend. Open your most recent retirement account statement. Find the total annual return figure, which is usually listed as a dollar amount in the year-to-date section. Write it down. Then write down your total annual contributions across all accounts. Compare the 2 numbers. If the return number is higher, you have already passed sign 1 and the account has been telling you that every month without labeling it. If contributions are still higher, calculate exactly how large the portfolio needs to be for the flip to occur at your current contribution rate. At 7%, the formula is simple. Divide your annual contribution by 0.07. The result is the balance at which returns match contributions. For someone contributing $9,000 per year, that number is $128,500. For someone contributing $12,000, it is $171,400. If your current balance is above that number, the flip is already behind you. Write the date it happened. That date is a milestone worth knowing. Action 2. Run your actual replacement rate, not the 80% default. Take your current annual household spending, not your income, your actual spending. Go back through 3 months of bank and credit card statements and get a real number. Now subtract the categories that disappear when you are not working: commuting costs, work lunches, professional clothing budget, disability insurance premiums through your employer, payroll taxes, which stop entirely at retirement. For most households in the $55,000 to $65,000 annual spending range, these categories remove $8,000 to $12,000 from the target. That directly reduces the portfolio size you actually need. Every $10,000 removed from your annual retirement spending target reduces the required portfolio by $250,000 at a 4% withdrawal rate. If your real spending target drops from $50,000 to $42,000 per year, you just moved your freedom number from $1,250,000 to $1,050,000. $200,000 closer from a 90-minute exercise on a Tuesday evening with 3 months of statements and a calculator. Do this before the end of the week. Action 3. Build your interference log starting today. This is the behavioral firewall that prevents the most expensive single mistake in long-term investing. The strategy switch made from frustration at exactly the wrong moment. Here is how it works. Every time you feel the urge to change something, sell, rebalance aggressively, redirect contributions, buy the thing you keep reading about, write it down. The date, the specific action you wanted to take, the market level that day, and the reason. Then wait 72 hours before acting on anything. Research on behavioral finance from Shlomo Benartzi and Richard Thaler on automatic enrollment consistently shows that forced delay periods dramatically reduce panic-driven decisions. The urge to intervene always feels most rational at moments of peak market fear. That is precisely when it is least rational. The interference log creates distance between the emotion and the execution. Most entries you will never act on after 72 hours have passed. The ones you do act on will be real, deliberate decisions, not reactions. The log costs nothing. It takes 30 seconds per entry. And the difference between a portfolio that reaches completion and one that gets dismantled in year 17 is often nothing more than a 72-hour gap between a feeling and a transaction. Back to Daniel. 49 years old, $412,000, $86,000 a year, convinced for 2 years that he was behind. Here is what Daniel found when he ran the 3 actions. His annual return last year was $26,800. His annual contribution was $8,400. The flip happened 4 years ago. His actual retirement spending, once he subtracted commuting, work lunches, disability insurance, and payroll taxes, came to $41,000 per year, not the $68,800 the 80% rule suggested. His real freedom number is $1,025,000, not the $1,700,000 the calculator had been showing him. He is already 40% of the way to a target that is $250,000 lower than he thought. He is not behind. He is inside the final sprint of Phase 1 with a second engine that started producing real output 4 years ago, and he had no instrument to read it. Daniel did not change his fund. He did not switch strategies. He did not take on more risk. He recalibrated the gauge, and the pressure reading changed everything. Now here is the number that should make the timing of this decision feel urgent in a specific, calculable way. At 7% annual compounding, $1 invested today is worth $1.97 in 10 years. The same dollar invested 5 years from now is worth $1.40 10 years after that. Your earliest dollars are worth more than your later dollars by a factor that compounds with every month of delay. But here is the piece that is rarely framed this way. The 5 signs in this video are not just about knowing where you are. They are about protecting what you have already built from the one decision that erases years of accumulation in a single afternoon. The panic sell, the strategy switch, the speculation that felt like acceleration, the advisor fee that compounded silently for a decade. The most expensive financial event in most people's investing lives is not a market crash. It is the behavior that happens in response to a market crash when the investor cannot see the pressure in the pipe and concludes the system is broken. Every month you operate without a legible gauge is a month you are one bad headline away from that decision. That is the real cost of not knowing your signs. If this video changed how you see your portfolio, subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it is the only way the algorithm shows this kind of analysis to people who actually need it. I publish this exact kind of work every week. Numbers first. No lifestyle performance, no get-rich framing, just the mechanics that the financial industry has no incentive to explain clearly. The pressure in your pipe is already building. The gauge was always there. You just needed someone to show you how to read it.